Now the thing I'm going to show you here, this is one of the jars that contained what's called the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the Dead Sea Scrolls are very famous. They were found in 1947, and these there were no New Testament documents, but they had copies of almost every Old Testament book was among them, and they were hidden in caves, probably because it was during the time of the Jewish War, which is from 66 to 73 AD. And then they would just disappear, probably because all the people that hid them were killed, so nobody knew where they were. So they were there for 1900 years until they were found by a shepherd boy. And what's significant for the Bible is because of all these copies of the Old Testament that had all been made before 66 AD, and in the case of the Great Isaiah Scroll, this is from about 100 BC. Now the Great Isaiah Scroll is significant because it contains, especially in chapter 53, some of the most specific prophecies about the death of Jesus. It says things like, he was led like a lamb to the slaughter, like a lamb before his shearer is silent, he did not open his mouth. Even in Acts 8, that's what the Ethiopian eunuch was reading. He was reading from the book of Isaiah the prophet in his chariot. So you can see Isaiah is there, but it says other things like, by his stripes we are healed. Yeah. And it's all there. And Isaiah, he had no beauty and majesty that we should be drawn to him. We all like sheep have gone astray. What's all this? This is written in Isaiah centuries before Jesus, and we have a copy from 100 years before Jesus, which was buried in this jar, not this particular jar, but in jars like this, which then didn't come to light until 1947. You know, the Isaiah prophecies are so specific that some people think these must have been edited by the early Christians to fit the facts after the event. A bit like Sean was alluding to there. And if you don't believe me, just read Isaiah 53. So you just look at it and you think, why would somebody say maybe this was written after the resurrection and made to look like an old document? It's because it so powerfully supports that what was happening to Jesus was prophesied in advance. But when this was found in 1947, you can no longer say that it was made up after the event. Somehow, without being planned, Jesus fulfilled all these things. He was buried with the rich in his death. Right? He was numbered among the wicked, being buried between two criminals, but he shared a grave with the rich. Right? Joseph of Arimathea. How do you plan that? How did Jesus plan where he'd be buried? It's unbelievable. And this was all written down, available to read 100 years before Jesus was even born. Amazing. That's the Dead Sea Scrolls. Yeah. So we're going to look at this little coin here. So this on the one side. So this is a picture of it. On the one side it says Caesar Vespasian, Imp, which is Imperator, Vespasian Caesar. So this is the Emperor Vespasian, and he is the emperor at the time of the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. His son Titus, who became emperor after him, Titus is in Israel, and he is commanding the troops, and their job is to put down the Jewish rebellion. This Jewish rebellion was so bad that it took more legions from Rome to conquer Israel, which is already technically Roman, remember, but it took them more legions to conquer these Jewish rebels than it did the number of legions they sent to England to conquer the whole of England. So the Jews were very stubborn and very protective of their temple. But once the Romans broke into the temple in 70 AD, which of course Jesus had predicted in at least two of the Gospels, once they broke in, what did they find inside the temple? Lots and lots and lots of money. Are you surprised? No. So much in the New Testament is about just how rich the temple was and how they got money off everybody. So there was so much gold underneath the temple. When the Romans got in, what did they use the gold for? What can you guess? Who did they need to pay first?
Judas Iscariot?
No,
that was after. Okay.
This is 70 AD.
Okay, 70 AD.
The first thing they had to do is they had to pay the soldiers. The thing is, you do not want a lot of soldiers who have not been paid. Why? What happens if you have lots of soldiers who have not been paid? They turn on you. So first job, you had all these soldiers, they've had a horrible campaign against all these Jews who won't surrender. So first thing is get the gold, melt it down, turn it into coins, and that is that 1 month's wage. And that is then given to one of the Roman soldiers, and the Roman soldier brings it to Britain. How do you know that? Because this was found in just west of Oxfordshire. And it's a Jewish coin. And it says the justice of the emperor, and the expert here, How'd-you-go, who's in charge of this gallery, he lives on our road. He says there's no doubt this coin was minted in Syria, and it was taking gold from the temple. And the date, Vespasian. Vespasian was only emperor about 5 years. So it's during that period, gold from the temple, and this ends up in a field in Oxfordshire. Why? Because once they'd finished fighting in Israel, what was the next job? We've got Boadicea, and we've got some problems in England. So the soldiers would then come all across France, and they'd come to be fighting here. And that's how this coin comes. So that's our link. So you remember the subtitle? From creation to Oxford. This is the link. So we've now come from Old Testament, New Testament, Roman times to Oxford. So that's a neat little link.
It wasn't the Alexander, not the one.
Okay, now we're now. So we saw how the coin, right? That coin came to England shortly after AD 70. Question for you now is, what about Christianity? When did Christianity come to England? And then for the rest of this afternoon, it is afternoon, yeah. So we're going to go through Christianity spreading in England and the background. So when did Christianity come to England?
Did Christianity come with the Romans? Or was that Catholic? That's something different.
Okay, basically we don't know, but the fixed date we've got is in 314 AD. There's a council in Arles, which is a real place in the south of France, and there are 3 bishops from England who are visiting Arles. I think Bishop of Lincoln and 2 other places. So from that, you go back. Okay, in order for there to be 3 bishops, you wonder, well, so how many churches would there be? What size are the congregations? And how old must they have been? Nobody really knows, but that's the earliest fixed point, is 313. So it's like with the wheel. We know they were doing the wheel in 2000 BC. It doesn't tell you how much further back the wheel started. So similarly, we know it's quite a long time before 313 for there to be 3 bishops all coming to this conference. So which obviously is during the Roman period, because Romans don't get until 410. But around this time, something else is happening. 313 AD, Constantine, who by the way is pronounced emperor in York in England. There's a big statue of Constantine there. It's kind of funny what actually happened in England. So that's in 313. But he says, at that point, it's called the Edict of Milan. He says that Christians can be permitted to have their religion. So no more persecution of Christians. He doesn't himself get baptized then, but he says it's now okay, and we can't say just by being a Christian you're doing something criminal. Now, unfortunately, things change. So, and unfortunately, what happens is power starts to become mixed with Christianity, and that is a very dangerous mixture. So everything in this room, I call this the map room. It's got the map over there. So, but I link everything with M and P. So it's the so this is the period of Milan, the Edict of Milan, and power. So now what happens when power? There are problems come. In 388, so not long after this, on August the 1st, 388, a sermon is preached in a town, and the congregation, the Christian congregation, are so riled up, they go out and they burn down the synagogue. Why? Because it's the Jews. How did they do this to Jesus? And they're really annoyed. And Theodosius is a Christian emperor, and he says to the church, you must rebuild the Jewish synagogue. So, can you see the issue there might be here? He said, you must, and then someone called Ambrose, who's the Bishop of Milan, says to him, yeah, look, you're the Christian emperor, you shouldn't be getting synagogues rebuilt. You know, are you a Christian or not a Christian? And he says, look, forget that. I'm the emperor, and therefore I need to keep discipline in the empire, right? I mean, is this relevant for today? Very much so. And Ambrose says, what's more important, discipline or true religion? And he says, I'm not going to give you communion unless you cancel that edict and that synagogue must not be rebuilt. But suddenly what's happened is the church and the empire has started persecuting other religions just the way that the Christians were persecuted. Now, who's this guy? This guy's in the 400s and his name is Alexander. Now, any idea from this what religion Alexander was? There's an important symbol. Thank you, Doctor. Yeah. So, yeah, can you see down there? That is the Jewish symbol for men of Catholic. Alexander was Jewish. Therefore, Alexander is liable to be persecuted by the Christians in 450 AD. Alexander has got a Greek name. He's working in Rome as a sausage seller. Hopefully, he's not selling pork sausages, because that would be against his religion. But anyway, this describes him as a sausage seller. That's that vulmaru. Anyway, that word means a sausage seller. And it gives his age. XXX, Anis XXX. How old is that?
30.
Very scholar back there, thank you. So he's 30 years old. How sad, 30 years old and he's died. What else do we know about him? Anima bona, he's a good soul. And it says here, omniorum amicus. Anyone guess what that means? Omniorum amicus? Amicus? Amicable, what does that mean? Friend. Omniorum, friend of all. What a great guy. This is what it takes. If you're a Jewish sausage seller in the 400s, how do you survive? How do you get on? Good sense of humour, be nice to your customers, be a friend to all, good soul. He was popular. And you know what? We know he had good friends because after he died, they did a little plaque for him. And you know what? They made a joke out of it. Because if you stand back and imagine this being pink, what does that remind you of?
Okay. It's like
A
meat.
slice of salami.
Yeah.
Right, so I guess, I think that's maybe a little bit of a joke about Alexander by his friends. They thought they'll give him a pink sausage to send him off with. Let's go over now to the map in the middle. Okay, what we're going to do now, very broad brush, is we're going to look at all of Europe and what's happening right, from about 400 through to 1600. So this is Europe and the Mediterranean, 400 to 1600, and then we're going to go upstairs. So what are some of the themes in this period? Well, M and P, Muhammad and the Pope. What's Muhammad's dates?
What?
Muhammad.
Isn't Muhammad the prophet?
The prophet, yeah, the founder of Islam, yeah. So he's 600s, and he is down here, right, in Saudi Arabia. So that's Muhammad. What about the Pope? Where's the Pope based? Rome. Thank you. Can you point to Rome? There we are, yeah. So he's the Pope. And the Pope, at one point there are 3 popes. So it's a bit of a mess. They're a mixture of good ones and bad ones and corrupt ones, and they have children, they call them nephews, and it's very messy. So here's the popes. So that's part of this period. Another feature of this period is pilgrims and monasteries. Okay, who can tell me what a pilgrim is?
Pilgrimage. Isn't it a journey?
It's a journey with what purpose? To go shopping?
To
Jerusalem.
It's a journey with a spiritual purpose. So, journey to the shops is not a pilgrimage. Okay, that's called going shopping. So, but people do pilgrimages and they travel to Jerusalem, they travel to other holy sites, they want to go to Rome, they want to see where famous saints are buried. So why would anyone do that? Well, you know, what did you see happening after Queen Elizabeth died? Why did people feel the need to go and see her coffin? It's almost 1 million people, I think.
Yeah.
That was a pilgrimage. They felt like, what could they do? Absolutely nothing. What were they going to see? Absolutely nothing. They weren't even going to see inside the coffin. Why did they go? We just felt we had to go. That's what people feel like when they do pilgrimages. They just want to be in Jerusalem. But what can you do when you're there? How's it going to help you in your Christian life? We just want to be there. So maybe it will make us feel something. So that's pilgrimages were going on during that time. And some of the pilgrimages, unfortunately, because they were coming through this area of Turkey, they were being attacked by Muslims. And so the Christians decided we're going to defend the pilgrims, and that becomes the Crusades. Then the best way to protect the pilgrims is actually to retake Jerusalem and make it part of Christendom. So that's the Crusades happening. So that's a P. What about the M? Monasteries. So we into it. They founded the monasteries. Why? Because they were disillusioned about the church. Because Jimbo talks about how the church started becoming too powerful and started persecuting the Jews and getting richer. and if you're a Christian, you didn't have to do military service, and you got exemption from taxes, suddenly, ooh, it's a nicer life if I can be a Christian in the Roman Empire. But what happened to Christ? What happened to take up your cross and follow me? So you can see the change that's happening. So a lot of the real Christians actually saying, we don't want to be part of this, we're going to live separately as true Christians, like a remnant. We're going to go and move into the monasteries, and we're going to live holy lives, because away from the corruption and the materialism and all the bad stuff that's going on in the churches in the Roman Empire. So that's how monasteries begin. And there's a lot in Egypt and dotted around the place. And then through the Dark Ages, it's monasteries that keep science, education, literacy, religion, horticulture, all these things. So after the end of the Dark Ages, all that knowledge is kept within the monasteries, and then comes out and is able then to feed into the Renaissance after that. Because the monasteries are the centre of learning throughout that period of the Dark Ages. The last M and P I want to talk about is manuscripts and the printing press. So during this period, where's the Bible? From 400 to 1600, where's the Bible? Would you go to a bookstore and buy a Bible in 500 AD? No. Really, it's on scrolls or it's on books called codices. And if you want to know more about things, come on my tour of the British Library, and I'll show you the most famous Bible in the world.
Didn't they write it on like papyrus? Like
thank you, yeah. So manuscripts can be written on some on papyrus, which is like vegetable matter, and some are written on skin, and that lasts a lot longer, and that's called parchment. But if it's handwritten, it's called a manuscript. So the manuscripts are all over the place, but especially in the monasteries. And especially the monasteries in the eastern area, because this is where Christianity began. Manuscripts are not up here in Europe so much, they're more around here. Now what happened at the end of this period, so we stopped having manuscripts anymore, also beginning the P, what happened towards the end of this period? Sorry?
They're not printing.
Printing, thank you. Printing changes everything. It's like the internet. So suddenly you can have a Bible printed and suddenly knowledge spreads. But that's no good if you can't read it because you're illiterate or the Bible's not in your language. It's only in Latin. So we're now going to go upstairs. This is like a nice sunny blue room, right? Because it's got the nice sea in the middle. Unfortunately, we're going to go upstairs where it's dark, low ceiling, a bit like cloudy England. Because that's where we're going to. So it's a reminder that we're now in England. Which bit of England? So we're now in the south of England, where there's a very important king. He's the only English king to have the name the Great. And he was born in Alfred the Great. And he's the one who's famous for burning the cakes. So Alfred the Great. And now Alfred was a king of the Saxons. He was in a Christian family. He was taken to Rome when he was 4 years old. He was a prince, and when his older brothers died, he became the king of England. But England at that time wasn't the whole of England as we know it now. It was only the southwest part of the country, because the northeast was controlled by the Vikings. Now, as the king, reading his Bible, of course he was interested in reading about the good kings. So who are some of the good kings in the Old Testament? If you were a king and you wanted tips on how to be a good king, who would you read about? Josiah, yeah. Solomon, asking for wisdom, not riches, right? David. And he particularly liked Hezekiah, right? Now why did he feel like he was like Hezekiah? Because Hezekiah was being invaded by the Assyrians. Why was that like Alfred? Who was he being invaded by? The Vikings. So he said, let's just see, how did Hezekiah win the battles? He saw Hezekiah trusted in God, and he thought, you know what, we are getting attacked by the Vikings because of our sin. Do you remember I said downstairs that the Assyrians dispersed people? 1 Kings 17 says because of the sin of the people, they weren't keeping to the covenant.
Yes, yeah.
So similarly, Alfred said, my people, the Saxons, are not keeping the covenants of God, and that is why we're being invaded. Now that's actually not really Christian theology. After Jesus came, he said, my kingdom is not of this world. But that said, I've still got a lot of respect for Alfred, saying, you know what the answer to this is? I need to make sure I teach that the people are taught properly, and they're sinning because they're not properly taught. They need more Bible schools, they need more teachers. So he got teachers to come across from France, which is where there are a lot more Christian leaders than there were in England. So he got them to come across, and he distributed books on how to be a Christian leader. There was one particular book called On Pastoral Care by Gregory the Great that he circulated. But the other thing he did was he started translating the Bible into English. He said, if my people can hear the Bible, not in Latin but in English, that will also help them to live faithful Christian lives. And he started translating some of the Psalms. People think the first Bible translator was Wycliffe. No. Alfred did it. About 400 years earlier. Now, with some of you who've got the leaflet, I'd like someone to do the next reading. The reading, this is, we've had one reader from over there. Thank you. Don't do the next one. Make sure you've got some lights in the screen.
I can see it.
Okay, so this is Alfred, and Alfred translated, this is Psalm 13, and he writes like a little introduction to help the English people understand why, like, what's the importance of this psalm, like a little commentary written by the king. So,
When David sang this 13th psalm, he lamented to the Lord that in his time there should be so little faith, and so little wisdom should be found in the world. And so does every just man who sings it now. He laments the same thing in his own time. And so did Christ with respect to the Jews, and Hezekiah with respect to the Assyrians.
isn't that incredible? That's like a sermon by King Alfred. He's applying the scripture to his own day. In fact, you didn't know that before. A lot of people don't know that about Alfred. The only thing they know about him is he burnt the cakes. Some people knew that he also won the battle of this and that, and he invented the 8-hour day, the candle, you burn your way down, and that tells you how the time is going. But look at him, fundamentally in his heart, he is someone who loves God, and he really wants the people to be living faithful lives. So that's one reason why he's called the Great. Is he's not just a thug or a warrior, but he's a scientist, he's a clever man, and he's a spiritual man and a moral leader. And this is called the Alfred Jewel. It says around the edge, Alfred made me. Now this is so valuable that the Ashmoleans say that if there was a big fire and they only took 10 objects away, this would be one of the 10. In fact, you can see on the floor that it said highlights to Alfred Jewel. This is like one of the very most important things in this whole museum. And it says Alfred made me round the edge. And that's because there's very little from the Saxon period that we have of by way of archaeology. But he was born in Wantage in Oxfordshire, not very far away.
I was going to ask because I'm thinking Alfred's school.
Yeah, that's it. King Alfred's school.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, perfect.
I was going to ask, I've seen this in Wantage somewhere.
Okay. For those of you who know Oxford, you know the most prestigious college is the one called Christ Church. That's the biggest and the best, and it's got a huge quadrangle. It's where the cathedral is, right in the middle. But before it was Christ Church, it was called Cardinal College, and that was named after Cardinal Wolsey. And he turned it into a college because just before that, thanks to Thomas Cromwell, all these monasteries had been destroyed. It's called the dissolution of the monasteries during Henry VIII's time. So what was the monastery that was there before? There was an Augustinian monastery, and the only thing that's left from that monastery is that little tile, number 70. It says down here, floor tile. This is the earliest physical evidence for a major pre-conquest church on the site of the Augustinian priory of St. Friedwald. So that's all that's left. So I said, don't be disappointed, but just anyway, that's there. This is just a reminder of how Oxford begins. Now, the university doesn't begin in 1000. The university begins later, around 1230. And that's after some students were banned from going to study in Paris because of this dispute between Henry II, who's the King of England, and the French king. And then the students needed somewhere to go. And they came to Oxford because there were about 5 different monasteries here already in Oxford. So there was that learning. I said you how the monasteries was where all the learning was. So they would come here to study. So Oxford then becomes the oldest university in the English-speaking world. Now, the university grows, but the teaching initially is all in Latin, until someone called John Wycliffe challenges that. In 1382, he translates the Bible from Latin into English. John Wycliffe was quite a fiery character, but the fact is you had to be fiery and tough to survive in those days. But he was the master of Balliol College in Oxford. And after his death, they were so angry with Wycliffe for standing up to the Catholic Church, translating the Bible into English, that they ordered that his body be dug up and then burnt, and ashes scattered in the river. So it wasn't enough that he was dead. They thought, we've got to, it's a shame he wasn't burnt alive, so we're going to burn his dead body now. That's how much they hated him for standing up against the powerful church. We talked about the power earlier on, the power in the church which had to be challenged to get back to the roots of what being a Christian really was. So the first step was to get the Bible into ordinary people's hands. After him came someone called William Tyndale. So William Tyndale was another Bible translator. He was a student in Oxford, and he famously said, when someone was joking with him, he said, look, he said, I will, in many years past, that a boy that driveth the plough will know more of the Bible than thou dost. So he had a passion. He wanted the ordinary person, the person who works at the Tesco checkout. That I want them to know more of the Bible than you clever lord or lady, whatever your name is. I want the ordinary person, the bus driver, to know the Bible for themselves. So he became a big Bible translator. And when the King James Bible came out, 85% of the New Testament was Tyndale's work and 75% of the Old Testament. So he pretty much did the whole job. But King James felt the need to try to improve it a bit. But Tyndale was this incredible translator because, like Alfred, like Wycliffe, he wanted the Bible to be available in English. And that led, in turn, to the Reformation and the whole, the Protestant church's beginning. But there was a battle, clearly. There was going to be a battle, and the Protestant bishops were persecuted. And in fact, there's a memorial in Oxford called Martyrs' Memorial, which commemorates 3 Protestant bishops who had not broken the law, they'd not done anything criminal, they had just dared to say, we reject the authority of the Pope, and we're going to follow the Bible. So, and they were Latimer, Ridley, and Cranmer. And if you look at the Martyrs' Memorial outside the Randolph Hotel, and just near the museum, you can see the 3 statues. And if you go to Broad Street, then you can see the cross on the ground, which is where they were burnt to death. And if you come on my Christian Heritage Tour, we go around all these sites and I'll point them all out to you. So these are 3 really brave men who took a stand so that we, ordinary people, could have the Bible in our own language. And as the 2 of them, Latimer and Ridley, were being burnt, one of them said to the other, be of courage, Mr. Ridley, and play the man. And we shall, this day, by God's grace, light such a candle in England as I trust shall never be put out. So these are 2 men being burnt to death, saying we trust that our lives will be like a candle that must never go out. And yet in every generation the candle has almost been put out. And each generation needs the new people and even the young people, looking at Joshua and the others, young people to say, we are not going to let the fire die in our generation, we're going to keep the candle burning. Now over in this corner, Cranmer was burnt the following year, Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. He was the one that helped Henry VIII get his divorce, but he was burnt the year later. And there's a band around here called Cranmer's Band, which was used to imprison him. Can you see here this ring? Yeah? I don't know if he was a size 32 or a 34 or a 36. You could probably tell if you measured it. But that's a reminder of these brave men who gave up their lives for their faith and for the Lord. And there you can see there's a picture of some burnings happening at an engraving. So this is happening in Oxford, in our city. So you can see the place that Oxford has got in the spread of the Bible throughout history. Because if it wasn't for these men, who knows whether we'd still be like a Catholic country or not. Now, after they'd had this period where people were burning each other, Catholics and Protestants, the next century was the English Civil War. And again, you had people, this time not burning each other, but you had people fighting each other. So you had the Puritans, who are like, they're the beginnings of the Restoration movement, the Puritans in the 1600s, saying back to the Bible, let's go back to the basics. So that was the Puritans and Cromwell. And then on the other hand, you had the establishment, which was the Church of England and the Catholic Church and the King. So they were the royalists. So there was this battle going on, the English Civil War. And as a result, after this period of the Civil War, you know what happened? People said, we are sick and tired of religion, unfortunately. We've had a century of people burning each other. We've had a century of civil war. Can we just take it easy now? And then what happened then was we had apathy and complacency took over. And that was the situation when John Wesley and his brother Charles Wesley came to study in Oxford in Christ Church. They found a very rich, complacent university. People didn't even take degrees. You just came to, it's like a finishing school. You come here, you attend a few lectures, you do horse racing on Port Meadow, you play some cards and gamble, you do some shooting, and do lots of parties. That's it, you've done Oxford.
And you get a certificate.
No need for a certificate. Just me. Yeah. So and the colleges like said, we'll build nice buildings so you can have your horses and carriages and have a nice life in Oxford. So this is not a Bible-believing, humble, God-fearing university. This has become very complacent and a very materialistic place. And so the Wesleys challenged that. So we'll go around the corner here to talk a bit more about them. So, what do any of you know about John Wesley? Anyone know about John Wesley? So he was the founder of the Methodist Church, but he was a student in Oxford at Christ Church, and then later on he became a teacher here and a fellow of Lincoln College. And again, on my tour, I take you to these places. But John Wesley, he founded something called a Holy Club. And that was to get students to do some work. So he and the others would get together, they would read their books, do their homework together, and then they would also do things like they would fast, they would go and visit the sick, they would visit the prison, even visit homosexuals in prison. And when they were challenged by some of these other rather lazy people, saying, why are you doing this? They said, Matthew 25, whatever you do for the least of these, you do it for me. So you suddenly had John Wesley and his brother Charles were saying, it's time to start really following the Bible again like we're supposed to. This is how it's been coming into our language, so we need to follow it. And they started, but they're in the minority. A bit like we looked at earlier on, they're in the minority, starting this Holy Club. You know, my son, who's 22, he helped me, he did one of these tours in the summer for a group of 20 Americans from Lubbock, Texas. So he did that tour. At the end of the tour, he said to me, Dad, I've been thinking. He said, I think I need to start a Holy Club in St Andrews, just like John Wesley. I haven't followed up on him to know if he's done anything about it, but just say this is the power of these ideas. In your school, you could start a Holy Club. Get some people together. We're going to be proper students, we're going to have moral lives, we're going to care for the environment, but we're also going to visit the sick, the needy, and we're going to live Christian lives and read the Bible together and pray. That's what John Wesley did when it wasn't cool. No one else was doing it. He did. The reason I brought you here to have all this is nothing direct to do with John Wesley, but this just shows what was happening in the 1700s. So you had the Restoration movement was beginning in the States from 1719, 1832 as the Christian Connection founded, but Europe is getting more and more rich and slavery is rampant. Okay, and a lot of this wealth in Europe is coming off the back of slavery and oppressing other countries, not paying people properly for their work. So you got richer and richer and richer, and against that you got people saying, we're supposed to be a Christian nation, let's get back to following the Bible. So that's this Wesley period of the 1700s. And John Wesley's right here in Oxford. Right? And in 1744, he preaches his last sermon and he gets kicked out. Do you know why he got kicked out? If we read this, have you got the leaflet with you?
I don't
Okay,
have it.
would someone like to read our John Wesley quote and see if you can work out why he got kicked out? What did he say that really offended them? Sure?
So he says, let me ask you then, in tender love and in the spirit of meekness, is this city a Christian city? Is Christianity, scriptural Christianity, found here? Who of you is in any degree acquainted with the work of his Spirit, his supernatural work in the souls of men? Even the talk of Christianity ye cannot, will not bear.
Yeah. So they didn't like that. There was someone called William Blackstone, who's a famous lawyer, who's buried in Wallingford, and he wrote afterwards in his diary, we heard a strange sermon today from Mr. Wesley in which he suggested that all the heads of the houses were not true Christians. That was bold. He was unafraid, like Stephen, in Acts 7, to stand up and say, why do you always resist the Holy Spirit? So John Wesley, in spite of being a posh English guy, he had that same spirit as Stephen, the Holy Spirit, standing up and just challenging his generation to come back to true scriptural Christianity. So, we need people like that nowadays. I don't know if we've got that courage, you've got that courage. So when no one else is doing it, that's what he did in 1744, and they kicked him out, never invited him back again. So what happened in the next century was things came to a head. Because on the one hand, you had all the riches coming from slavery, and on the other hand, you had more and more people in England who'd become Methodists, who were listening to these evangelical preachers who were saying something's got to change. And in the end, through William Wilberforce, who's another great Christian, a brother, things did change. And here you can see something really bizarre. This is a biscuit. Now, I still can't believe it, but the label's very clear. This is a biscuit that's 150 years old. So I don't know what preservatives they had in it.
Wow.
It must be very stale.
Yeah.
And it's a biscuit that was cooked to commemorate the abolition of the slave trade. So that's that white thing. So when you come closer, you can see it. And next to it, there are medals from 1834, and there's a Bible verse on them. And the Bible verse is. God, I wish we had Bible verses on our coins nowadays. It's not Galatians 3:28. No, it could have been. It's actually, here we are, Psalm 118. This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvellous in our eyes. It's great having Bible verses on coins. I think we should bring that back, don't you?
Yes, I think so.
So get the scriptures back into people's hands. Now the other thing, apart from these society changes happening, because of the Bible being recovered, a bit like the days of Josiah, because of the Bible being recovered, also there was this incredible desire to spread the gospel all over all the nations. So there was a special desire to go to China, because at that point 1 in 3 people were Chinese, and yet there was no knowledge. Did the Chinese have any idea of the gospel? And people said, oh, well, maybe they'll be saved anyway. Someone who didn't believe that was Hudson Taylor. And Hudson Taylor was a doctor from Yorkshire, and he decided to go to China to preach the gospel to the interior, and he founded something called the China Inland Mission. And he travelled in 1854. But guess what? Before he had landed in China, no, it wasn't landed, he saw them on a fishing boat off the coast of Shanghai. He had never seen a Chinese person, because there were no Chinese people in England. So Hudson Taylor, he never saw a Chinese person until he knew they were there. He gave up his medical career, a bit like Abraham we talked about earlier on. It was only when he saw some Chinese fishermen on a junk ship just off Shanghai that he saw his first Chinese person. And then he landed and he founded this incredible mission. But over here we've got a painting of Shanghai in the same year that Hudson Taylor landed. So you can see what it looks like. That was in 1854, and you can see all these buildings, and if you look carefully you can see an American flag.
Yes.
You see? So the Americans were there in Shanghai, and you can see a couple of English flags.
Yeah.
See a Union Jack here and there. And I've put a little copy. There's a little copy of a bit of that picture on your leaflets, so you can see this. I'll ask you, what's happened? We talked about the subtitle is From Creation to Oxford to the Ends of the Earth. So what about the ends of the earth? Well, China, by about 1900, let me get this right. By 1949, they think there are about 840,000 believers in China. 840,000 in 1949, and then China closed. Today, there are conservatively at least 115 million Christian believers in China. 115 million. Think about England. In England, that's more than our entire population, of whom a very small percentage goes to church.
Yeah.
They have got 150 million people who say they want to be known as Christians because of Hudson Taylor going there in 1854, and because of his faith stepping out like Abraham. So that's the 1800s. What happened in the next century, in the 1900s? Well, if you remember, C.S. Lewis came to Oxford. We talked about it in 1917. Came to Oxford as an atheist. He said, you know what, even if I was going to be religious, I wouldn't be a Christian. It's a ridiculous religion. This is him, 1917, as a hard man from an atheist from Northern Ireland, who's from a Protestant background. He says, now, why would somebody's death 2,000 years ago make any difference to the world nowadays? He was very hardened against it, and he had a full party, everything life, until in about 1930, he then came to believe. And he said he was the most reluctant convert in England at the time. And he went on to write things like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and people flocked to see this in the cinema, and he wrote this thing called Mere Christianity, a book. and he's become a very popular, person that you can read and you can quote from. Also, at the same time as C.S. Lewis, within a year or so, my father came here from an atheist family, and my father became a believer as well. And if it wasn't for my father, I wouldn't be here now. So that was a big thing again, happened in the 1900s. And here we are, so today, obviously, in the 21st century. So we've now covered the whole of the history, from creation to Oxford, to the end of the earth, and a little bit back to Oxford again. So that's the end of the tour. So I'm really thank you for your
Thank you so much.